GPOrlando. I am Patrick Sullivan, joined this evening by one half of the very popular BBD versus CBM Battle Series, darling of the Open Series, Chris VanMeter.
With a little less beard.
Little less beard this time. And let's get into it.
All right.
Start the build.
So concept art here is a little different than what we're used to with Theros Limited. It's a gold color focus set similar to Return to Ravnica. You see here we have Ankle Shaker as our first rare, which is a very powerful effect, but doesn't do a lot of damage. You have to have a lot of creatures in play to go along with it. Misfire Weaver is a very good common, and there's nothing else as far as commons go. There's nothing else really that jumps out at me as very good. We do have a fixing land already.
So, for a lot of viewers at home, as you mentioned, very different than, say, on 15, Theros. Even the Return to Ravnica block really wasn't this multicolored centric.
Yeah.
So how do you go about actually sorting your sealed pool? It seems like that's fairly complicated. You want to be, of course, sorting your monocolored cards, but how do you sort out your tribe cards?
Well, what I like to do first is get them sorted into piles by color, lands, colorless, and then gold cards. And much like how I like to do sealed once Dragon's Maze came out, because that changed the dynamic of Return to Ravnica block sealed, is I like to go through and just sort out the playable cards first, and from there you can start working on your deck.
So you get a sense of kind of where you're deeper in your particular colors and color combinations by immediately cutting out the monocolor cards that you consider not playable?
Exactly, because the format is just all about raw power with the three colors being pushed and the games being slower. You don't really have to focus on synergy as much as just cards that can win the game unhindered.
So you mentioned, it's a slower format. It's about power and raw stuff. You've done a lot of sealed builds. What percentage of your sealed builds would you say you're just basically one wedge, your odds on, or your just guy is particularly deep and you just do that, versus how often are you 4 or even 5 colors?
It's actually 3 to 4 colors is the norm. I find I enjoy, well, not so much enjoy, but it's much better to be focused on a 2-color combination that is an enemy color, so like the Zendikar fetch lands, and then from there you have access to 2 different shards, or wedges now. So you can, I thought it was a Bloodstain Miner, but it's not.
Almost went 2 for 2, man, just
almost,
missed it.
But we did get this. This is the second best rare in the set in my opinion, so that's very good.
What's it behind?
Wingmate Rock.
Okay.
So I like being focused on a 2-color enemy color combination, and then branching out to 1 or 2 other colors for the shards. Because a lot of times you'll have cards like the Charms that are just very, very playable and worth splashing 1 color, especially since we have all of these lands. A lot of times, 1 color splash for 1 or 2 cards is basically a free one.
Yeah, I was taken aback by just building my own sealed decks, how many of these lands appear in your average pool because they appear at common, and how easily they facilitate a 4th or 5th color.
Yeah.
So, to your point about, you're looking for 2 colors, they're kind of enemy colors, just sort of, idly going through watching you as you were opening your packs there, it looked like your black and white monocolored cards were especially deep. I mean, a lot of quality rares. Absolutely. Were you noticing the same thing as you were going through, or were 2 other colors sticking out to you?
The black and white were definitely 2 colors that were sticking out to me, which means if we were going to be base black-white, then we have access to green for Abzan and red for Mardu. So, like, if we have a powerful, let's say, a Mardu card like this Ankle Shaker, I could definitely see myself just, playing, these 2 cards and this card just to support an Ankle Shaker.
Assuming that your Abzan is your base wedge.
Absolutely. So as we see here, this actually is a low number of land fixtures for an average sealed pool. I'm usually seeing anywhere between like 4 and 8, and we only have 6 here. So usually I like having more. So we don't have a lot of ways to actually splash just like 1 or 2 cards. So we're probably going to end up just a solid 3-color deck.
So you mentioned, you're looking basically for 2 colors that are not allied as the base for building your decks.
Yep.
On top of that, are there any commons that you think are particularly noteworthy, or cards that you're worried about that inform the way that you build your pool, trying to fight against them on the other side of the table?
Yeah. So in each color, there's basically like 1 or 2 commons that kind of define the different archetypes that you're going to go into with the different shards. So I really like Mardu Hateblade. It looks like we don't have one in here. It's just a 1 white, 1/1 that you can get Death Touch. Yep. One of the few playable 1-drops. And that's just really good in any deck that's either trying to trigger raid or just wanting to get to a late game to hold off larger creatures. In green, I really like the 2/1 that when it dies it gains you 2 life. I think that card is playable in almost any of the decks that you're playing green in, just because you need something to bridge the gap and get to the late game where you have your bombs, and it does a really good job with that. For blue, I actually really like, I can't remember the name of it, 3/03 for a green that you can sack to go get a basic land and put into play.
Of spring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The element of spring or whatever.
Yeah.
That card's really good. I guess I can see if we have one. Yeah, embodiment of spring.
Embodiment.
Yeah, this is definitely like one of the defining cards as far as blue goes, because it's going to get you to the point that you're wanting to get in every game, which is the late game. Everybody's playing, 4 or 5 lands coming to play tapped. They're not really pressuring you, and even when they are, you just have like a bunch of idiots you can play face down for 3 mana in a trade.
So with, you mentioned the Mardu Hateblade as being one of the only playable 1-drops in the format.
Yeah.
And there's all these lands that come and play tap. People are getting wiped the whole way. So because of the pacing of the format it seems very slow by the way that you're describing it. Are you trying to build your decks for just maximum raw power, or do you try to go the other direction, try to see if your build facilitates an aggressive deck that allows you to capitalize on the people who are fumbling around?
I've tried both, and the only times that I've been happy with an aggressive strategy is when you have a deck that is capable of playing Raider Spoils. That's like the card that makes the aggressive decks playable, in my opinion. So it's an enchantment, 3 and a black. All your creatures get 1 power, and whenever a warrior damages a player, you can pay a life to draw. So when you're in like the Mardu colors, there are a lot of warriors that can facilitate that. Plus, it just makes all of your creatures larger. In addition, you have a few creatures like there's the 2/1 for 1 and a red that you can jump for a white mana. That's very good. Along with cards like Mardu Court Chief that allow you to attack through the 2/2s that they play face down and continue to get in damage.
So you need to be able to push through blockers under the assumption that your opponent is going to be able to, around turn 5, turn 6, really start clogging up the ground, and a lot of your random 2/2s for 2 are no longer going to get the job done.
So we definitely have a lot of playable white cards. It actually isn't that very high on the power level outside of the High Sentinels. Salt Road and Abzan Battle Priest and Alabaster Kieran are all playable 4-drops. Horde Chief is a good 3-drop if you have a lot of 1s and 2s that are attacking. Then we have a Removal spell. But I can see myself wanting to splash High Sentinels, but I don't know how solid into white we're going to end up being.
So, all right, so at this point now, your blacks seem very good. Are you now looking at perhaps, black-green as a shell to try to do that enemy color combination thing you were mentioning before?
We definitely could. Black and blue could also end up being a shell, since those 2 colors usually play well together. But there isn't a lot of fixing when you get into like the 3-color decks with them. So Ancestor is very good. Dead Drop is playable.
So talk to me about the delve cards. The mechanics on diminishing returns naturally. Some of the cards seem fine to play, even if you're not really discounting that much. Some of them, like Dead Drop, seem very predicated on you being able to fill up your graveyard to some extent. When you're going through, do you hit a point where you're looking at your cards, your playable delve cards, where you say, this pool doesn't look as good as it appears on the surface because I'm just not going to be able to keep my graveyard stocked enough to facilitate all of them?
Yes, as far as all of the different mechanics, I feel like Delve and Prowess are 2 of the weaker, whereas the other 3 are very, very powerful. Raid, because you're being rewarded for something you want to do in Magic, attack. Very similar to the landfall mechanic from Zendikar and Block. And then you have the Outlast mechanic, which is very good because the format just facilitates these long grinding games.
We get into games where I can't attack, you can't attack, and if one of us has a couple of Outlast creatures in play, it puts a lot of pressure on the other side of the table to do something fast before those creatures just overwhelm.
Absolutely, especially the Outlast creatures that outlast for only 1 mana, because then you're able to outlast and continue to play creatures to build your board. So you're in this pseudo phase where you're double spelling every turn and your opponent isn't, even though your second spell is just building your guy by 1, which over the course of 2 or 3 turns you can equate to 1 or 2 spells. So it's definitely very, very good.
And those seem like cards at lower rarities that might allow less powerful decks to keep up with objectively more powerful decks, because as long as the game is dragged out, those cards go way up in power level.
Yeah, one of the cards that I've been the most impressed with is Abzan Falconer. Just a 3-mana 2/3, so it blocks all the morphs, and then it outlasts for 1 and gives all you guys flying. So it's very easy to stabilize and then kill your opponent with a bunch of flyers.
Very quickly it becomes a 3/4 flyer, which is well above the curve. Any other Outlast creatures, any tokens that you have, any other token tricks like Feat of Resistance become much more powerful.
Absolutely. Now our blue actually looks very, very good. So this is a card that I've just been constantly impressed with. Kara Spell Snatcher.
Spelljack on the body, basically.
Yeah, Spelljack on the body. But it's also a 3 mana 2/2 or a 4 mana 3/3, which is a big game. A 4 mana 3/3 is actually a big game in this format.
Is that because of morphs, or is there something else going on?
It's because of morph. A lot of times you just play it as a 4 mana 3/3 and your opponent really can't attack anymore.
So how's your blue looking? I mean, it appears relatively deep.
The blue actually looks really good. So we have the Embodiment Spring. We have a 2-drop to fill the curve. This guy, Riverwheel Airless, has been very good for me as far as just closing games out. It's basically a dragon. Like it's just a 6 mana 4/5 flyer, which is very good in this format where the games are end up going long and you're going to be able to cast your spells. Which is another reason that I'm more and more liking the Delve cards, just casting them straight up for their mana cost. Because even though they're obviously going to be more powerful when you pay a cheaper rate for them, but even still, just submerging something or Ancestral Recall, even if it costs 8 mana, like you're going to get there. Like everybody's gaining life from their lands. The game's going on very long.
So walk me through Wetland Sandbar here. This is a significant card to me because when Morph first debuted in Onslaught, Glory Seeker, which was just a 2/2 for 2, was among the better commons that White had because the morphs kind of set the tone for the play, and gameplay usually started on turn 3. So playing something on turn 2 that was the equivalent body of a morph was really important in achieving tempo when you were on the play, or breaking serve when you were on the draw. Is the same thing going on here, or is the format not as morph dense where something like this is as mediocre as it appears?
Well, it's not so much that the format is not as morph dense as it is. There's just a whole bunch of morphs you're playing. It's the 2-power creature on 2 isn't as big of a tempo play now because there isn't a shock. There isn't a good 2-mana removal spell to remove the morph that they play so that you can continue to gain the tempos. Like, you're going to be playing this guy, they'll play a morph, you're just going to crash and then play a morph of your own, as opposed to getting in game states where you're like shock another 2-drop and attack.
But it runs counter a little bit to what you alluded to earlier, which is the format's just about raw power and haymakers, goes on for a long time.
Absolutely.
This seems valuable in tempo games, but not very good in games that are about who's playing the biggest thing.
Exactly. On top of that, these creatures, when they're trading with the morphs, it's not, there really isn't any downside to it because like you're staying at parity tempo-wise, but then it's fueling these as the game gets into the mid-game. So I really like playing these 2-drops and being aggressive with them when I can try and trick my opponent into trading their morph.
It's funny you should mention that. I find myself bluffing a lot more combats in this format when Dull spells are in my hand because it's, all right, well, worst case scenario, it's a Lotus Petal for this thing I can't cast,
Exactly. So, looking here, I definitely think that blue is the best color of the cards that we open. So next I would look at the gold cards that have blue in them to see where we want to go from there. So really, we have these 2 morph guys, this morph guy, and then these 2 cards as well.
So do you consider this to be the most important cycle of the commons, basically, the 3-color tribe morphs? All of them seem very high power level, and Drat and Sealed has to be the same thing. Yeah,
they're all very, very playable. In fact, the uncommon cycle of them, like the 5-mana guys that usually do something when they come into play, are also very, very powerful. But as far as from like a deck building perspective, this cycle is extremely important, and you just want to play as many of them as you can because they're, it's gray ochre with upside.
Yeah, and actually huge upside with many of these creatures.
Yeah, like this guy is just a 3/4 flyer that lets you loot every turn.
Not even a bad deal for 6.
Exactly.
If you're playing ahead of schedule or using it to blow your opponent out when they block, just seems excellent.
Yep. So it's looking like Sultai and Jeskai are the 2 options for these, and since we don't have a lot of fixing, I don't really want to end up being 4 colors. So really it's going to depend on if we want to be playing green and black or red and white. So I know that I already want to try and play this card if possible. And while we do have some powerful black cards,
the depth seems like it's lacking here.
Yeah, plus we don't actually have any removals. So I feel like white's probably going to be better because we do have at least a removal spell.
So you mentioned High Sentinels you consider to be the second best rare in the set behind Wingmate Rock. Where do you put Necropolis? Seems very powerful to me. Does that make your list of the top 5, or is it just something where, it's good but not something you're going to bend over backwards to put together?
Yeah, it actually, I don't like Necropolis because it might as well just not have the second ability on it because it's so very rarely going to come into play. because when you're trying to accelerate out with Delve, then you're removing the resource that you use to actually kill the creatures. So when you can play a 4/5 flyer, on like turn 4 or 5, it can be really good. But is it really that much better than Hootie Mandrills? And at that point, it's just taken away from your other Delve cards. I just have not been happy with Necropolis Fiend at all.
So this does not move the dial for you very much.
It does not.
Wow, I think that a lot of players' instincts would just be, well, Necropolis Fiend's probably among the better cards. Huge flyer, play ahead of schedule, can kill things potentially repeatedly, but just requires too much of your graveyard to be consistently powerful in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, the 4/5 flyer is still fine in this format, but it's not like I'm not going to pack one, pick one it, and then just like make myself go into that. Like I would definitely take something like Arc Lightning over it, or just like an actual removal spell. Because the games are going long, any big dumb idiot can win you the game. You just have to get to that point.
Okay.
So red actually looks like it's going to be very good. So we do have some removal as far as with a Ringlow and an Arc Lightning, which can actually end up being very good because cards like Wetland Sandbar end up seeing play to combat morphs. And if there's ever a time where they just go like this into a morph and you get to 2-for-1 them, that's very good. And really anytime you can 2-for-1 your opponent in this format, you feel miles ahead because everything is just so grindy.
It's true of sealed formats, but particularly the slow ones, they're often card advantage fests.
Yeah. So let's clean this up a little bit so we can start building.
Get rid of we've already cut all this. Get it out of here, get it out of here.
Black's gone, I think green is gone. Let's start off. So I like to put my morphs in the 3 slot because I find that's where I'm going to be casting them the majority of the time. And I'd much rather get a more realistic, thought of how the cards are going. Same thing with the Delves. I usually put them at 2 less than what they actually are.
Oh, let's put them at 1.
You put them at 1?
The most optimistic.
1 mana?
Yeah, my Treasure Cruise.
So
it's always
I
going to be
usually
1.
put these at 4 and these way up here as well. So we have a Summit Prowler. Now, Valley Dasher is one of the few 2-drops that I'm not too happy with, just because there are, quite a few, X3s, and it just dies really fast. So we'll turn him sideways because I might end up not playing him.
Yeah, a friend of mine says Valley Dasher, in every block there's the red card that's unplayable, so that the red deck has to play 3 copies up to have a good draft deck, and Valley Dasher is that card in this format.
Okay, and so like I mentioned, the uncommon cycle, Warden of the Eye is that for Jeskai. So it's just a 3/3 for 5, then when it comes into play, it lets me rebuy one of these.
And you have a lot of quality cards to choose from here. I mean, these are not marginal spells by any stretch.
Absolutely. Weapon Master is good. I've actually had a lot of great interactions with Mistfire Weaver. I think it's one of the more powerful blue cards. It's just a morph that you can play on your curve that turns into a flyer that can get you damage. But being able to counter a spell with it is very, very good. Some of the times the games just come down to 1 or 2 spells because we have a bunch of idiots.
Kind of feels like exactly the kind of card that you want, the way that you're describing the format. If the games are long and about outpowering, well, it's very good as a morph play. And if the games are kind of tempo-oriented, well, then you get a 4-mana 3/1 flyer, and that's a good deal as well.
Since we're going to actually have Red and Skullkin, it gains a little bit more value.
So it looks like your blue-red's a pretty good base here, so you're feeling pretty... I mean, you mentioned you had the high Sentinels among the better rares, but your white was really shallow. Do you think there's potentially a Jeskai build here that makes sense, capitalizing on your deep blue and red, and kind of touching the marquee white cards that you mentioned before?
Absolutely, that's what I'm looking at now. And since we're not green, we actually get to play this. Which I think is fine. I'm not really happy. I do like Mordio Horde Chief, but I want to have 4 or 5 1/2 drops to go along with it.
So this seems among the more stable mana bases, or maybe not necessarily stable mana bases, but one of the least greedy builds of a sealed deck I've seen, where you are really, this is 2.5 colors here. There's only a handful of white cards, and you are absolutely base blue-red.
Yep, I definitely just like being, base 2 colors, like I said, and then end up using the 3rd as a splash. So we do actually have 2 Jeskai banners if we end up wanting to play them. I haven't been too happy with the banners because I just feel like it's not really forwarding your game plan, and unless you have something to give you the payoff on the ramp, I don't really like them.
I feel like
we do have Set Adrift and Treasure Cruise, so it might be good here.
If you are interested in ramp, or if you're base in those 3 colors, but as a as a mana fixer, let's say you're 4 or 5 colors, they seem pretty mediocre to me. I mean, you're probably unlikely to be able to sacrifice them. And at that point, there's a huge cost associated with playing those kind of cards.
Absolutely. So, like, we have a lot of pretty powerful proactive spells here. So I think that Jeskai Student might end up just being better than Valley Dasher. And plus, on the off chance that Ryan is Mardu, which I highly doubt because he always plays Abzan, Jeskai Student's very good against the Mardu decks.
Just 1/3, 4/2 is already pretty good against their 1/1s and 2/1s and so on.
Absolutely. Now, we do have 2 cards that I want to touch base on, Take Up Arms and Orderly Outburst. So I like these cards in the Mardu decks that have, or that are actually playing cards like Trumpet Blast, or in a Jeskai deck that has Jeskai Ascension, since you have a way to pump your team. But outside of that, I haven't really been happy with these 2 cards.
Is it just, again, because people have so many morphs, or is it a raw power issue? I mean,
just like the 1/1 bodies don't really
matter very much in a format where people have an unlimited sea of gray ogres.
Yeah, like unless you have a way to take advantage of having, you know, a mass number of creatures, I just, like, why? I'd just rather have something else.
Right, would rather cast one big thing rather than a bunch of small things. So,
All right, so we're at 21 here.
So you said BBD really likes Abzan a lot. Do you think that that's just his sort of, you know, bias or his preference in the format, or do you think it's objectively just the best? Most sealed pulls are going to lead you down that road.
I feel like if you can play Abzan, you should, because the Outlast mechanic, I think, is just the best limited mechanic. However, sometimes you'll run into pools like this that just have very powerful cards that can make up for not being able to take advantage of the Clans mechanic. Like, Jeskai is based off prowess, and we have, you know, like 1 actual prowess, 2 prowess cards, but it's really not going to matter because of just the power level of a lot of cards.
So walk me through Disdainful Stroke a little bit here. We see these counter spells a lot in core sets. You know, Negate and Essence Scatter, they're different, but there's the same parallel of it's a really good deal, but it's not reliable that it's going to be happening on time or, you know, when you have the 2 mana available. Do you consider this card to just be very powerful and sealed in general? Or is it more, you know, 22, 23rd playable territory for you?
I think it depends on the texture of your deck. If you have a lot of morphs, I really like it as like a turn 5 play where you like morph, leave up 2. And if you're playing banners, I really like it as a, you know, turn 3 banner, turn 4 morph, leave up a Disdainful Stroke. It's one of those things that gets worse as the match goes on. Like, once your opponent knows that you have it, they'll just be running out their worst spells into it. But again, because the format getting ahead is so tempo-based, being able to trade a 2 mana spell for a 4+ mana spell is usually going to be very, very, very good for you.
So what's your tipping point where you would start cutting them? Like, would you play the second one? Would you play the third one?
I would play 2. I wouldn't play more than 2 unless I knew my opponent had, like, Ice Sentinels or Wingmaker on, or just like a card I couldn't beat. So, like, I like to think of it as, you know, if your opponent has a Soul of Theros, then you want these. If he doesn't, then it's probably still good, but it's not necessary to win the game.
Force Away is another card I'm interested in. I mean, your deck's not that 4 power dense. You have a lot of 3 power. Is that a card where you just think 2 mana for unsummon is still good enough to play in the format because it's so tempo oriented?
Yeah.
So even if your pool had no way to turn on the Ferocity, you would still play the first copy?
Yep, I would play Force Away in any deck that has blue in it.
Okay.
Again, just because, you know, the tempo, everything is just so tempo oriented. It's also very good in Temur. Or Timur, I honestly can't pronounce them correctly, because so many of those creatures are all about having trample and being able to make that tempo play plus getting in damage when you bounce a creature. It's just been very, very good.
So how many playables are we looking at right now? 17 land format, I assume you think?
17 or 18. I like to play 18 if I have a lot of the come into play tap lands. I honestly couldn't explain to you why. I just feel like that's right.
I guess it would just be, you know, you want to have more options where you have an untapped land to play in your hand, so you don't just have to play your comes into play tap land at a time that's inconvenient for you.
All right, so we have 21 here, and I know I want to play at least 1 banner.
Okay.
And
even though your curve's not that high, I mean, you don't have a huge top end either.
Yeah, I don't have a huge top end. But a lot of these morphs, I want to be able to play them for their normal costs, you know, if it were to arise. So I definitely want to play a banner. Plus, it helps out with the 2 prowess cards. and I feel like this is probably an 18 land deck, just because like we have the 2 Delve cards, so I want to be able to cast them for full cost if I need to. But we also have High Sentinels, Abzan Battle Priest that are going to want us to have some way to dump our mana. We have Warden of the Eye that's going to want us to have 5 plus mana to be able to cast it and then recast our rebuy card. And then I also have some cards like Skuldkin where I want to keep mana up to use it. Same thing with Mistfire Weaver and Spell Snatcher. They're reactive morphs as opposed to proactive morphs. And then we also have a counter spell. So I think that 18 land and a banner is probably where I want to be with this pool. Now, because we have these 2 cards and such a powerful card, but like High Sentinels, I'm actually considering playing a Tormenting Voice.
Okay.
And if I would do that, I would play it over the banner. I think you want to play this in an 18 land deck to get rid of extra lands.
So I'm surprising, I think that a lot of people would just consider this card, if you're base red and sealed, of course you want to do this, because so much about the games are, either land screw or land flood, and it's just, drawing cards, finding your bombs is an important thing to be doing in sealed. You seem to be speaking like this is something you'd prefer not to play rather than play.
Yeah, I would prefer not to play it, just because it's not developing your board. So I also have where are the blue cards? Yeah. So I also have the instant speed draw 2 that I'm not playing at 4 mana, which whether which one is better, I think it just all depends on the texture of the game and how the mana is going. But I definitely don't want to be playing this because we're pretty cluttered here. So this might actually end up being good.
And historically, Inspiration has been not great in Seal, but okay.
Yeah.
And this format's maybe a little bit slower than most Seal formats, at least compared to M15 or Theros. And you're still saying you wouldn't go near this card most of the time.
In these types of decks, yeah, I definitely wouldn't. If I had multiple Delve cards that I wanted to be able to cast, I definitely want to play it. But here I think I'd rather have Tormented Voice, just as a way to facilitate these 2 Delve cards.
But if you're Soul Tie, this card becomes a little bit more attractive to you because the games
Much
are just
better.
more about doing slow, powerful things.
And we also have a Jeskai Elder, which, we're playing the Jeskai Student, so maybe we should look into
We can't be too picky, right? We're already playing the student.
Yeah, I think I'd rather have the 1/3. This is just literally the same card with 1 extra toughness, but it's white instead of red.
This has a trigger that might matter.
That is true.
So, and this is also in a splash color right now. So.
Yeah, so actually, it might be better just to play the Elder over the Student.
And you don't consider the Glacial Stalker to be playable?
Glacial Stalker is playable, but I don't
It's another dragon of sorts, a ground dragon.
But I don't think I would play it over any of these 4 morphs. And I also don't think that I would play it over any of those guys.
So maybe the last card out?
Yeah. So we're at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22. Now actually, it might be better to just not play the Treasure Cruise and play We Fade instead. Just like a guaranteed 2 cards for 4 mana as opposed to the 3 cards from Treasure Cruise.
It seems like your deck's not, it's obviously not a Sultai deck. You don't have a lot of self-milling here, but it still feels like there's enough spells in the deck where Treasure Cruise is, because from my perspective, in slow games of Sealed, I can't imagine cutting draw 3, even if it's, maybe you're not casting it on time or whatever, but it's not something you automatically feel has to go in your deck.
Yeah, actually I feel like if we cut the Treasure Cruise, then I would be comfortable cutting the banner, and then we could play Voice and We Fade.
Okay.
So how does that work? So we smoke these.
And how many playables are we at in that build?
And then 22, and then just play 18 lands. I think I might like this a little bit better.
Okay.
Plus it gives us some cards that we can use to be proactive with our Elder. In games where we have Elder, we want to be attacking with it.
Yeah.
And if we get a couple triggers off of it, it could end up being nice.
So this build looks like 2.5 colors, kind of like you mentioned before, not going completely off the rails, trying to play every powerful card in your build.
Yeah.
Are you happy with how this looks? It feels, the mana's pretty stable. Again, 2.5 colors. Feels a little light in power relative to a lot of sealed pools. Would you be happy as your pool for tomorrow, or do you think this is below the 50% line?
I think that I would be content with this pool for tomorrow. I definitely would like some more mana fixing. As it stands, we really only have two dual lands that we can play. This for the blue-white, and then this because it has red white on it.
Yeah.
So I definitely would like a little more mana fixing, and that might be a reason to put the banner back in the deck. Just as it gives us our ramp for our top end, but also gives us some more mana fixing when we need it. But I think that because we are just splashing white, having our 2 dual lands give us white is fine. It'll allow us to play like 3 planes and the rest blue and red lands.
Yeah, because you want to have your blue and red cards coming to play on time early on in the game, and then have your mana fixing help with the half color and your 2.5 color.
Yeah. So I think that I would be content with this pool, and I think that this pool has a very good chance of going X1 with 2 buys.
There it goes. So are there any cards when you have a build like this? Now you have Disdainful Stroke, you have Smite the Monstrous, you have a lot of catch-all solutions to some of the bigger stuff. Are there particular cards you're concerned about playing against? Are there cards you wish you had in your sideboard? What are your major concerns with that?
Major concerns with a deck like this, honestly, would just be not being able to cast my spells. I feel like with the power level of cards like Spell Snatcher, Weaver, Icy Tempest, Aerialist, and the spells that we have, I think that we can navigate through things pretty well. We can definitely just end up losing if they just have like a Siege Rhino on turn 4 and we don't have one of our removal spells for it. But other than that, I think that the rest of the deck is actually really good.
So there you go. After that pull, Chris VanMeter decides to settle on his Just Guide cards. It's a pretty sweet looking 2.5 color deck. We're going to be back in a little bit, and we'll see CVM actually square off against BBD, and we'll see who wins.